From flying million-dollar private jets, to dying broke in Monticello, to losing your entire life savings in a Ponzi scheme, and then making it all back. This is every US president's wealth explained. But first, this is the Broke Boy Club. Presidents with a net worth under $1 million in today's money. And when I say today's money, I'm referring to the year 2020. Because if I adjusted for 2025 inflation, everyone would be a trillionaire. Except James Buchanan, one of the poorest presidents in American history. Born into a log cabin with a big family, he never had much more than the basics. And as congressman, senator, and secretary of state, Buchanan received government paychecks, which stunk. And back then, he couldn't insider trade his way into millions. I'm looking at you, Pelosi. Kinda like Abe Lincoln, another log cabin kid who clawed his way up to success. And although he made a name for himself as a lawyer, it didn't exactly rain dollar bills. Until he became president and earned a $25,000 salary, which is like $750,000 in today's dollars. We're rich! The only problem, his term was cut short by John Wilkes Booth, leaving Mary Todd Lincoln to struggle financially after his death. But if you couldn't tell, America was pretty broke back then, because Lincoln's successor, also poor, Andrew Johnson started at rock bottom and apprenticed as a tailor just to get by. Then climbed the political ladder as mayor, governor, U.S. senator, vice president, and eventually president. But here's the kicker. Decades of public service didn't exactly make him rich. In fact, he left the White House with little more than he came in with, including a whole lot of enemies in Congress. But at least Johnson didn't lose his entire life savings to a scam, like Ulysses S. Grant, a military genius and war hero who grew up pretty poor. But after the Civil War, the public adored him, showering him with gifts and money. And by the time he marched into the White House, Grant had a solid chunk of change. Until he fell victim to a Ponzi scheme. Cause Grant entrusted his money to a Wall Street firm ran by his son and Ferdinand Ward, a swindler so slimy he earned the nickname the best hated man in the United States. How charming. And overnight, Grant went from wealthy war hero to having $80 in his pocket. $80. But he didn't quit. With throat cancer closing in and his family's future on the line, Grant reached for the only weapon he had left, his pen, and feverishly poured his final months into writing his memoirs. And against all odds, it paid off. Because after his death, they became a bestseller, generating $450,000 for his wife and children. Good job, big guy. You made up for it. But while some presidents rode the roller coaster of riches, others never got rich at all. Like Woodrow Wilson, who spent most of his career in academia as president of Princeton University, then governor of New Jersey. Respectable jobs, important jobs. But financially, those roles came with pretty modest paychecks. And hey, at least he saved his pennies, unlike this next president who couldn't stop flexing. Because Chester A. Arthur went full Gilded Age baller, buying a palatial New York City townhouse, filling it with extravagant decor, and strutting around in the latest high fashion. But here's the twist. He wasn't born into money. Arthur was just a lawyer and the son of a preacher, which meant every dollar that hit his account usually walked right back out the door. 'Cause Arthur lived by a simple philosophy. You can't take it with you. So why not spend it in style? And somebody should have mentioned that to James Garfield, whose life was tragically cut short. 'Cause Garfield was a boy genius. Born into poverty and driven by education, he ascended into politics and served nearly 20 years in Congress before becoming president. And then suddenly, dang, just months into his term, he was assassinated at 49 years old, never having time to build wealth. But what he did leave behind was something bigger, a legacy of putting education and public service above money. Come on, you gotta respect that. Kind of like Calvin Coolidge, who came from a frugal New England background and carried thriftiness everywhere he went. He practiced law, climbed the political ladder, eventually made it to the White House. But here's the thing. Silent Cal never dabbled in business deals or real estate. So his net worth stayed, well, modest, just like the man himself. All right, enough with the brokies. Let's raise the stakes. Because these presidents weren't just living on salaries. They stacked assets, built estates, and left behind fortunes worth an estimated 1 to 10 million in today's dollars. Like William McKinley, who didn't inherit a dime. In fact, during the Panic of 1893, he went completely bankrupt after co-signing a couple of bad loans while governor of Ohio. Rookie mistake. But luckily, his supporters rallied and helped him repay his debts. And with his Canton, Ohio home adding some value, McKinley ended up doing all right in the end. But hey, if you can't make money, might as well marry into it, right? Because that's exactly what Warren G. Harding did. His wife Florence was the daughter of a wealthy businessman, and she was sharp, because she rolled up her sleeves and turned Harding's newspaper, the Marion Star, into a real moneymaker. And that paper ended up being Harding's biggest source of wealth. Go give your wife a kiss and tell her you love her. And you know that saying, your network is your net worth? Well, Franklin Pierce lived it, because he built a successful law practice, was the son of the governor of New Hampshire, and married Jane Appleton, whose father just happened to be the president of Bowdoin College. With that kind of circle, Pierce stayed modestly wealthy most of his life. Same deal with Rutherford B. Hayes, a successful lawyer in Ohio, who married into a well-to-do family. And after his presidency, Hayes retired to Spiegel Grove, a 25-acre estate with a 10,000-square-foot mansion. Honestly, I could get used to this. Meanwhile, William Howard Taft stacked his wealth the old-fashioned way, through a lifetime of legal and public service. The guy was a lawyer, judge, Secretary of War, president, Yale professor, and Chief Justice of the United States. Talk about a resume. But even with all those prestigious titles, Taft never really built a massive fortune. He lived comfortably, sure, but mostly off a steady career and a solid home base in Cincinnati. Kinda like Millard Fillmore, who worked as a lawyer and even helped found the school that became SUNY Buffalo. But here's the catch. None of that made him rich. After leaving the White House, Fillmore mostly lived off his investments and the fortune of his second wife. Smart man, smarter marriage. But let's take things up a notch with William Henry Harrison, who came from a prominent family and married into even more wealth. Because his father-in-law was one of the largest landowners in the Northwest and sold Harrison 160 acres in Ohio. On top of that, Harrison expanded his holdings with land bounty grants, public land the government handed out to veterans as a thank you for their service. So yeah, Harrison was land rich, but cash poor. 'Cause when he died just 1 month into office, he left his family with nothing. Congress had to step in and grant his widow a special pension just so she could get by. So much for all this land. But at least his grandson, Benjamin Harrison, held onto a slice of the family land. But Benjamin didn't just coast on inheritance. He built his own fortune as a top-tier lawyer. How good was he? He once represented Venezuela in an international case against Britain, standing up for the little guy on a global stage. And when he wasn't busy winning court cases, Harrison was kicking it at his Victorian mansion in Indianapolis. Not bad, Benny boy. Not bad at all. On the other hand, Harry Truman was a little sketchy when it came to money. He grew up a farmer, stumbled through business, and nearly went bankrupt in the 1920s. So when he got into politics, Truman leaned hard into the image of the struggling everyman. And after his presidency, he even claimed to be strapped for cash, turning down lucrative corporate gigs just to look humble. Congress felt so bad, they created the presidential pension and doubled his salary while he was still in office. But here's the twist. Truman was a lot comfier than he let on, 'cause a 2021 investigation revealed that he left office with a modern equivalent of around $6 million, including a secret $2 million account he quietly pocketed. Hey, give me that. But this next guy didn't have to hide his way to wealth, because Zachary Taylor, our 12th president, was born into a prominent plantation family. And throughout his long military career, added to it by acquiring plantations in Kentucky, Mississippi, and Louisiana, where over 100 slaves were forced to work. So Taylor's $7 million net worth came from the Old South, and certainly not a presidential paycheck, 'cause he barely had time to collect one, dying just 16 months into office. But speaking of short-term presidents, Gerald Ford had a pretty basic career. A longtime congressman who basically stumbled into the Oval Office after water